And we're back. The final video for the predictions. All the divisions are just about done except, last but not least, AFC South. The Titans, the Colts, the Jaguars, and the Texans, leaving the best to last, of course. But in all seriousness, this is the final division. I've covered all other 7, so go check them out if you're interested in a particular one after this, of course. And if you haven't seen any of them, I'm basically just going to cover the sort of key players of these teams, offense, defense, what it looks like, the outcomes of these teams, and of course, give a rough estimate as to what their record looks like come the end of the season. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. So first of all, this division is on the large, I'd say, quite weak compared to a lot of other divisions. There's probably one team that we'll obviously get to that is most people's pick to win this division. But of course, starting from the bottom, finishing last in this division, I think it's going to be the Texans. I don't think they're going to get much stronger than they were last season. Obviously, the second worst team in the NFL, got that second pick, picked up new quarterback in CJ Stroud, of course. And I just think, while they have some nice pieces, particularly on the defense, I think that are sort of, getting up there in their reputation, I guess. I still think they're probably like a 1 or 2 years away from being a solidified threat in the NFL in general. And one of those newly acquired players is on the defense as well, Will Anderson Jr. He's looked quite good so far. Obviously a very high pick, the highest non-QB taken in the most recent draft. So big expectations coming from the 3rd overall pick in Will Anderson off the edge, lots of pressure, and I think D'Amico Ryan's being a defensive-minded head coach coming from San Fran. I think he can implement someone as young and as high potential as Will Anderson very well in his first season. They've also got a couple of young pieces in the DB room. Derek Stingley Jr. taken the year before last, and then Jalen Petrie, the safety. So they've got some nice young talent on both sides of the ball. In terms of the offense, the one to look out for from the most recent draft, I think, is Tank Dell. Nathaniel Dell, but goes by Tank Dell. You wouldn't think it looking at him because he is tiny and the name Tank doesn't really represent him too well, but I think he'll have a part to play in maybe not a major way, but throughout the season you will see flashes from this kid because he's a real speedy, electric, fast twitch type receiver, taken in the 3rd round, so dropped down probably due to his size, but I think he can play a decent role being one of the receivers on this offense for the rookie quarterback CJ Stroud. The other wide receiver to take note of, I think, is Nico Collins. He's now a couple of seasons into his NFL career, and I think this year he can take that next step to being a solidified wide receiver 1 for the Texans. Houston also have a, I think, sneaky good offensive line. It's one that doesn't get mentioned as much around the league, comparing them to, the best of the best in terms of obviously Philadelphia. Then you've got, Detroit. These are good offensive lines, and it doesn't get talked about enough. And I think considering they've got a rookie quarterback, it's a great situation for him to be in, having that protection, because obviously a lot of new things, a lot of big, fast players coming at him, and I think he can be protected well this season. But ultimately, it does take me to the record, and I don't think it's going to be much better than last season. As I mentioned at the start, I think they're probably, a year or 2 away from being a solid team in the NFL. So I think it will just be a 5-win season for the Texans. So in 3rd place, and some people's take for 4th in this division, I've got the Colts. The reason I just bumped them up ahead of the Texans first and foremost is I just think they have a little bit more X factor, particularly in their rookie quarterback, Anthony Richardson. Obviously taken after CJ Stroud in the draft. The thing that gives him a lot of hype is his athletic profile. You also, in the draft combine, he was an athletic freak, breaking records, and we've seen it, I think, in the preseason and in game 1. So I'm recording this after game 1, which is a bit annoying, but not really trying to take any of that into account. But it's just hard to deny the athleticism of this quarterback, Anthony Richardson. And on the flip side, I think he really just has his head screwed on quite well. I've seen a couple of interviews from him, and he just seems to speak well, seems to be calm and just understand the situation that he's in. He doesn't have to set the world alight on every single play. He's just trying to get better, I think, game after game, week after week. And then, of course, we can't talk about the Colts without mentioning the Jonathan Taylor situation. So I think while this makes the Colts probably weaker, I mean, it definitely does. You're losing one of the best running backs in the entire NFL. it does give Anthony Richardson a bigger platform to showcase his talents. But going back to Jonathan Taylor and Jim Irsay and all the things that have been going on in the offseason for running backs, but particularly obviously Jonathan Taylor, he's obviously not going to be playing in the first 4 weeks. Didn't play week 1, not going to be there for the next 3 games. And that's a big loss. And then if they don't eventually play him as well, there's a lot of potential of sitting out, or maybe he eventually does get traded if they reduce their asking price. But there's just a lot of friction and tension between the two. And ultimately, not having him here now makes the Colts a lot weaker. So I think under Shane Steichen, formerly of the Eagles, of course, and working with Jalen Hurts, it's a nice little mix going from Hurts to Anthony Richardson in this situation. So while it might not be pretty at times, and of course there's obviously knocks on Anthony Richardson coming out of college, not necessarily actually running that much in college. He preferred to probably throw, and now he's probably going to be asked to do a little bit more of that running. I mean, he's a massive player, 6'5" frame. He's got the tools to do it, and I think under Shane Steichen, as I mentioned, it's a good opportunity for this Colts to sort of find where they can be under Anthony Richardson as their quarterback and sort of rebuild in a sense. I look at their defense and I sort of struggle to see many game changes outside the obvious one in DeForest Buckner. Had a nice little touchdown against the Jags. And then of course they've got Zaire Franklin, linebacker, tackles everywhere. Kenny Moore at the cornerback. So there's a couple of pieces, but there's just not enough game changes, I think, that can sort of swing the momentum, change the game in the moment. And so really looking at this Colts team, if it weren't for Anthony Richardson and just the height in which he could potentially get, because obviously there's a lot of variance with Anthony Richardson. If it weren't for him though, and that sort of excitement around what he could be, this Colts team would be looking quite disastrous, I think. And ultimately it could go that way, but I do have them finishing 3rd, 1 spot above the Texans in this case. And in terms of a record, I don't think it's going to be much better, to be honest. I'm just going to go with the 6 wins, so 1 more than the Texans. But they do have that nice X factor in their new quarterback, Anthony Richardson. So it's interesting to see how they go for the rest of the season. But that brings me to 2nd, and I do have the Tennessee Titans, which, surprise, surprise, means the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to win this division based off my predictions, but we'll get to them. But in terms of the Tennessee Titans, I think they actually just across the board still have a very nice team. They got a lot of nice pieces on both offense and defense, X-factor type players on offense. It's just question marks at quarterback still. I know Ryan Tannehill, he's sort of in that Kirk Cousins range in terms of you know what you're going to get. I'd still rate Cousins highly if you want to, my rankings there, but he's still just got a ceiling. And while he'll be throwing to now DeAndre Hopkins, it's not really enough to get Tennessee, I don't think, to the next level. But the thing that they can hang their hat on is their defense, particularly that run defense. It's basically year after year, it is one of the best, if not the best, run defenses in the NFL. Of course, the San Francisco, but outside of that, Tennessee Titans are almost always in the mix for the best run defense. Cornerbacks, safeties, that can be a bit of a question mark, but if you've got such a great run defense, then you can sort of, you can understand why it's not maybe as good in the DB room. And this sort of defensive front is, I guess, personified by their head coach, Mike Vrabel. There again in Tennessee, I think he's just a great fit. But going back to that offense, this is where they sort of lack. They've still got King Henry. We don't really need to touch on him because he's still got it. Running backs, there's all this talk about, getting to a certain age, how much durability they've got, but you're still going to run King Henry basically into the ground because he is the guy on the offensive course. But back to Hopkins as well, who they acquired. And a lot of people, again, negative talk surrounding this guy because of previous receivers that have gone there in Julio Jones, Randy Moss, these legends, and DeAndre Hopkins, I think, can be eventually considered that because he's an unbelievable receiver. I think he won't go down that path. These receivers really had no impact at Tennessee, but I still think DeAndre Hopkins has got it as long as he stays injury-free. I've said it before in one of my shorts in terms of the player to watch for the Tennessee Titans. I think it's Hopkins because he's obviously going to be the number 1 guy there receiving, and he just makes it easier for his quarterbacks to get him the ball because of the way he runs routes. It just makes it easier for quarterbacks, and I think it's a perfect situation given that Ryan Tannehill or whoever, if it's maybe Will Levis or Malik Willis at some stage, whoever it is, it's just made easier by DeAndre Hopkins. I think the thing that they do need to figure out though is they did get rid of AJ Brown and obviously drafted Treylon Burks. That needs to sort of work out for that trade to make sense, and so far, more based off the fact that Treylon Burks has not been able to stay fit, it hasn't really worked out. And obviously, Philly with AJ Brown got to the Super Bowl. But again, a lot of it's to do in terms of Tennessee with the quarterback. Question marks there. So while I've sung the praises of the defense, and I mean, we saw it in the first game against the Saints, very gritty, and I think that's just what Tennessee is. I just don't think the offense is going to be able to get to the sort of same heights as the defense and put points on the board. And that's ultimately what you need. If you've got a great defense and you're not putting points on the board, it doesn't really matter because eventually the other team is just going to maybe sneak enough points and ultimately beat you. So with the record, I don't think it's going to be a great season. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. I'm giving them 8 wins. And that takes us to the divisional winners, Jacksonville Jaguars, from my predictions. And I think it's going to be most people's predictions to win this division because of just the strength all over the board, but particularly this offense. This offense could be one of the most high-powered ones going around in the NFL this season. With Trevor Lawrence, third year in the NFL, of course, and second year under Pedersen, so it could be anything. With the weapons that he has, Calvin Ridley is the big one, brought in off the suspension. Obviously didn't see him last year. We haven't really seen him for a while because before that I think he had his injuries as well. So Calvin Ridley could set the world alight and really remind fans, not just of Jacksonville, but of the whole NFL, how good a receiver he is. And in terms of the other weapons, you've got Zay Jones, who I just don't think is talked about enough. He got a big bag, and obviously there was some sort of eyebrows raised there, along with Christian Kirk, who might be taking a back seat. Obviously, week 1 didn't get much of a look in, as I do think Zay Jones is ultimately going to be that second receiver there, because Christian Kirk is more suited to that slot role. And they've also got Evan Ingram in terms of pass catches. And then on top of that, you've got Travis Etienne in the backfield, one of the most electric running backs in for a big season. And on top of that, you've got Tank Bigsby, who they drafted, who's a very exciting prospect. Who knows how much he will eat into Etienne's workload, but nonetheless, that's not the point. You've just got a great secondary running back there, which can just contribute to a more high-powered offense. I think the defense is where the question marks can be raised for this Jaguars team in terms of how far they can go into playoffs. Because obviously, if they finish first, they've got the 1 to 4 seed locked away. But can the defense really match it with the best offenses in the league? Obviously, Kansas City, they came up against last season after miraculously coming back against the Chargers in that bizarre game. But the defense is, I think, the question marks. Even though it's headlined by nice players like Fasad Aluakan, Josh Allen, there's plenty of young talent on this team. Devin Lloyd, Trayvon Walker, maybe not so as much, #1 pick. There's some question marks there, even though there's some nice pieces. Can they just be a solid enough defense where they're not conceding too many points? But myself, like many, are expecting this offense to really heat things up this year. Trevor Lawrence, I think, is in for a big, massive year. I've got him on my fantasy team, just side note, so I kind of want him and need him to have a big year. But he's got the means and the weapons to do so. He's a generational type prospect. Year 3 could be absolutely huge for him. And in a weak division, even more so. And so what do I think they will finish the year with in terms of the record? I'm going to give them 12 wins. I think that's a very decent mark. And honestly, I was sort of feeling like giving them maybe 1 or 2 more, but I'll just temper my expectations and not get too excited just about the prospect of this Jacksonville team. So 12 wins I think is pretty reasonable. But that is it for my predictions. Not just this video, but they are all done. As I mentioned at the start, go check them out if you so desire, because I've done every single one now. This is the AFC South complete. Jacksonville Jaguars on top. It's got to happen, surely, because this team is too good not to. But of course, remember to like and subscribe if you did enjoy this video and you want to see more, because there's plenty more NFL content coming. I'm going to be doing shorts and the like. And if you don't know, I also do Premier League content as well as NBA. So subscribe if you're interested in any of that. because there's plenty more to come. So thank you for watching, guys, and I hope to see you in the next one. Cheers.